Hello, yes, good morning everyone. Today we will discuss about an important topic, that is what is NATO. So the abbreviation of NATO is North Atlantic Treaty Organization. North Atlantic Treaty Organization. The NATO abbreviation, which is a national security alliance in between US, Canada and European countries. It is an national security in between US, Canada and some European countries. NATO, abbreviation of NATO, North Atlantic Treaty Organization, and with this NATO, it's an national security alliance in between US, Canada and European countries, some European countries. It was established in which year? 1949. It was established in 1949. The main reason of this formation is the Soviet Union's growing influence. The main reason of this formation is Soviet Union's growing influence. This is the main reason behind this NATO formation. Soviet Union's growing influence. This is the reason behind this NATO. So NATO is North Atlantic Treaty Organization, and it is a security alliance in between which countries? US, Canada and some European countries, and it was established in which year? 1949. And the main reason of this formation is Soviet Union's growing influence. Okay. Main reason of this formation is Soviet Union's growing influence. So the US believed the Soviet Union to be a threat. What the US believed? The US believed that the Soviet Union to be a threat. For that, the US decided that the member of NATO were told to spend at least 2% of their GDP on defense. So the member of NATO countries were told to spend how much? At least 2% of their GDP. For what purpose? For defense. because the US believed that the Soviet Union is to be a threat for them. So the members of NATO were told to spend at least 2% of their GDP for defense. So this is the main reason behind this NATO. That is this 2% of their GDP is funding, NATO's funding. That is the source of NATO's funding. Source of NATO's funding from here. The most important thing, one more important thing about this NATO is the most important thing about NATO. One more important thing is their Article 5. What? Article 5. So this is the most important thing about this NATO. So what is this Article 5? This Article 5 is called the Commitment Clause. It is called the Commitment Clause. This is the most important thing about this NATO. The most important thing about the NATO is Article 5, which is called the Commitment Clause. According to Article, so what is Article 5? What Article 5 says? Article 5, according to Article 5, it says if any NATO country is attacked, if any NATO country is attacked, it would be deemed to be an attack on all NATO countries. If any NATO country is attacked, if any NATO country is attacked, then it would be deemed to be all NATO countries, on all NATO countries. It would be deemed to be an attack on all NATO countries. Attack on all NATO countries. So this is Article 5. This is about the Article 5. What the Article 5 in NATO, the most important thing about the NATO is Article 5, which is called the Commitment Clause. So what Article 5 says, if any NATO country is attacked, it would be deemed to be an attack on all NATO countries. Then what they will do? Then all NATO members would come to protect the one country with their military. Then all NATO countries, so all NATO members, if any one country is attacked, it would be deemed to attack on all NATO countries. Then immediately all NATO members would come to protect the one with their military. So in NATO's history, so how many times this Article 5 it was implemented? It's only in NATO's history, Article 5 was invoked only once. It was invoked only once. When? That is after 9/11 terrorist attacks. At this time, 9/11 terrorist attacks. So in NATO's history, Article 5, it was invoked only once, and that is when at the time of 9/11 terrorist attacks. So this is about the Article 5. It meant that NATO allies had to provide soldiers in Afghanistan when the US invaded Afghanistan. So what is this 9/11 terrorist attacks? It meant that NATO allies had to provide soldiers in Afghanistan when the US invaded Afghanistan. INVADED, invaded Afghanistan. So finally, about this NATO, how many countries were involved in this NATO? 30 countries. 30 countries. 30 countries are currently members of this NATO, but these 30 countries contribute 50% of their global GDP. 50% of their global GDP they contribute. So this is the explanation about NATO. Once again I am repeating. So NATO is, it's a North Atlantic Treaty Organization, and it's for, the meaning of this one is national security alliance in between which countries, US, Canada and some European countries, and that NATO established in 1949. The main reason of this formation is Soviet Union's growing influence. Soviet Union's growing influence. So the US believed, what the US believed, United States believed the Soviet Union to be a threat for them. So then the member of NATO were told to spend at least how much? 2% of their GDP for defense. So this is the actual funding source of NATO. This 2% of their GDP is the actual source of this NATO. The most important thing about NATO is Article 5, which is called the Commitment Clause. So what Article 5 says? Article 5 says if any NATO country is attacked, then it would be deemed to be an attack on all NATO countries. Then immediately all NATO members would come to protect the one, that attacked country, with their military. In NATO's history, Article 5, it was invoked only once, and that is at the time of 9/11 terrorist attacks. It meant that NATO allies had to provide soldiers in Afghanistan when the US invaded Afghanistan. So NATO, 30 countries are currently members of NATO, but these 30 countries contribute 50% of the global GDP. They contribute. These all 30 countries contribute 50% of the global GDP for NATO. So this is the information about this NATO. Please like, share and subscribe. Okay.